Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Washed Ashore. I'm once again joined by Max, who I think has probably just become my co-host with our podcast now. It's usually just you and I, Max.
It's a unique double act now, I think. It's
It's
niche. It's very
yeah,
niche.
yeah. We'll take on the podcasting world, just the two of us.
Yeah. So I mean, sometimes I present. Sometimes, sometimes you're in the seat there as well. Or yeah, but generally speaking, this is the format.
Yeah, this
I
this
think
is if it ain't broke, don't fix it, eh?
pretty much. Pretty
Yeah.
much.
So for this month in the Heritage and Education Centre, we're looking at those stories from our archive because I think, and Max will agree, we've got quite a big archive, over
Yes.
1.25 million ship plan and survey reports. We've also got quite a bulging kind of corporate archive, and all sorts of weird and wonderful things crop out of it. And during our digitisation program and been able to put documents on the website, some of these stories are coming out that we've never heard of before. We didn't even know were in our archive. So we're going to take some time throughout this month to share some of those stories with you. So for this episode, Max has pulled out a story that I absolutely love. I think it's a great story. And it also ties in really nicely with International Women's Day, which is coming up in March. So, Max, over to you. Tell us this story.
Perfect. Yeah. As you said, yeah, I know that it's a story that you particularly like. It's one that I know that we've spoken about a little bit. But for the purposes of the podcast, I think it's definitely a good one to really highlight because it sheds light on a really interesting side of society and of engineering and maritime history generally. So essentially, this I'm gonna talk a little bit about Lloyd's Register's first unofficial female surveyor. Um, so anybody who's familiar with the history of Lloyd's Register, may be able to tell you that our very first female surveyor was appointed in 1979. But that's fine. Apology, if you didn't know that, that's okay. You will see the rest of this will make sense. But obviously, for a little while we've been cataloguing and digitizing our ship plan and survey report collection. As Charlotte said, it's 1.25 million records strong. Incidentally, on that note, by March we should have, I think, 520,000 archive records available online. So yeah, it's we're going at quite a pace. And within some of our earlier material, which is some of my favourite material, we find a lot of interesting, curious material, like letters, correspondence between people, that really highlight, I think, what's so interesting about some of those outports, and what's so interesting about working life, in particularly in rural areas. So this was a letter that we managed to dredge up, which was basically produced by the Bangor office in Gwynedd, in Wales. And the what's really interesting about it is that it shines a light on this fascinating story of Lloyd's Register's very first unofficial female surveyor, nearly 160 years ago, in 1859, 1860. So just to set the scene a little bit, we've always had a surveyor at Bangor since about 1834 with the reconstitution of Lloyd's Register, and whilst they weren't exclusive surveyors that were for Lloyd's Register, they were non-exclusive surveyors, so they were able to carry out surveys for other organisations or societies that were operating in the area. But that being said, for the most part, the surveyor that was operating was a Lloyd's Register surveyor, and carrying out Lloyd's Register surveys. So the letter that we found is dated the 29th of October 1860, and the Lloyd's Register surveyor for Bangor basically headed to Carnarvon to inspect a schooner called Clyde, with a travelling cost of about £2, which is about £118 in modern money. So the surveyor's name was it's an interesting name. It's John Johns Jr.
Original.
It is, isn't it? It is, isn't it? You know, imaginative parents. Um, but
Excellent.
yeah. So amazingly, when we found this letter, we were able to cross-check, our knowledge of sort of John Johns Jr. With his staff record that we have in our staff Bibles. So he was born in 1814. He's quite local. You know, he was born in just outside Bangor in North Wales, and he was married to his wife Anne Johns. Anne Johns, I should say, and prior to becoming a Lloyd's Register surveyor at Bangor, he'd worked in the area quite extensively as a shipbuilder. So eventually, in terms of what happened with his shipbuilding business, we're not really too sure, but I think we know that he did mainly kind of repair work on ships and boats and other kind of small vessels. It being quite an interesting sort of mainly fishing based and sort of coasting port at the time. So he was appointed as an LR surveyor on the 9th of March, 1854. We know that he had an annual salary of about £120. By 1860, 6 years later, his salary had risen to £170, which is pretty generous as a wage, which sort of put him on a par with many other kind of skilled professions at the time, like clerks or teachers. And so interestingly, actually 1 year after he became surveyor, the post of surveyor at Bangor became an exclusive position, meaning that obviously they couldn't conduct a survey or inspection for another organisation. They were now exclusive surveyors for Lloyd's Register. Just as a brief little bit of sort of background, eventually the Bangor office was incorporated under the auspices of the Liverpool office in 1909. But so, as I say, going back to the 29th of October 1860, John Johns Jr. was heading to Bangor. He was heading to Carnarvon to inspect the schooner Clyde. So, as I said before, he was a familiar face in local shipping circles. He was also, from the correspondence, he was very well known to the owner of the Clyde, a man called Griffith Jones. Very Welsh name as well, I think you'll appreciate. Griffith Jones.
Love that name. Excellent.
Amazing.
Excellent Welsh name.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Griffith Jones sent, we know that from a letter that he sent, he indicates that, and this is the quote, that we are not good friends. So he goes on to explain that the dispute that he's had with the Bangor surveyor, considering that they actually don't live all that far away from each other, they're very well known to each other, perhaps even may have had a rivalry when John Johns Jr. was also a shipbuilder in the area, but we don't know. But the letter indicates that they were not good friends. Apparently, after John Johns Jr. Had failed to send a certificate of class to Griffith Jones, I think, which over a period of about a year. So Griffith Jones was, I think, sending letters to the chairman at Lloyd's Register, basically asking for some kind of update on where his certificate of class was for his ship called the Daniel. And apparently he'd failed to send it for a total of 12 months. And it's really interesting because it's one of the things that I think when we're finally back into the office, it'd be great to chase up that little line of inquiry, because I'm sure it's something that we would see within the GC minutes as well, because it wouldn't surprise me if Thomas Chapman, sort of rapped Johns on the knuckles for that.
Wow, yeah, we know what Thomas Chapman was like.
Yeah, he was very difficult. Yeah, fair, fair but firm.
Fair but firm, yeah.
But so following the inspection of the Clyde, about 3 weeks later, John Johns Jr. Produced the survey bill, which again included this charge of £2 for travelling, £2 for the survey as well, and I think it was about a shilling for materials as well that I think were provided on site to Griffith Jones. So what followed as a result of this survey bill, which we have within the archive, is a very, very, very angry letter on. It's an ink spattered, angry letter dated on Christmas Day, on the 25th of December 1860, from Griffith Jones to the Lloyd's Register Secretary at London. That's Thomas Chapman. It basically absolutely frothing at the mouth about this particular the charge that's been made by Jones for surveying the Clyde. And so the letter basically explains Jones' predicament, overpaying the survey fees for Clyde, and says that actually, sod it, he's going to go and he basically says to Thomas Chapman, I don't trust the surveyor at Bangor. He's charged me a huge amount for this survey, so get rid of the survey that was done there. I'm taking my ship to London, and I'll get a London surveyor to do it for me. Wow. So, but incidentally, we do still have the Bangor survey report as well within the collection, so it is there. But we know that he did basically just pull out of Bangor and go straight to pull out of Carnarvon and go straight to London. To be honest, to get it surveyed, to get the Clyde surveyed there. So the letter, as I say, it's very, very, very angry. It's you can tell from the writing that there's been a lot of pressure that's been applied in the letter, and as it's absolutely spattered with ink all over the place. So presumably this was between either before or after Christmas dinner that he was writing this very angry letter. But he basically outlines this stormy working relationship that he's had with John's with John Johns Jr., the Bangor surveyor, and obviously outlines what's happened before, and that this is nothing to do with anything that's happened before. He's very angry about the survey fees that have been imposed for the Clyde now. But then at the end, he sort of lightens up a little bit and says that he forgives the Bangor surveyor for any wrongdoings, and this is the quote, he's been in a bad state of health for some time. So Jones was very right with this. In fact, unknown to Jones, John Johns Jr., the Bangor surveyor, had died 2 days prior to the writing of the letter. So he died on the 23rd of December, 1860. But I gather from the correspondence that he'd been ill for quite some time. We don't really know what he was ill with, but only that he'd been ill for some time and then died subsequently on the 23rd of December. But this is sort of where the story becomes especially interesting, because the next line reads, his wife, Mrs. Johns, in my opinion, is a very good surveyor. So it seems that for the period that her husband was very gravely ill, John Johns Jr.'s wife, Anne Johns, was carrying out some of his surveys on his behalf. So it's quite likely that she was carrying out those surveys and then bringing them back for her husband to then sign before she sent them over to London. So quite amazing, really. I mean, I suppose in theory, having done a little bit of research into this, it sounds like it's quite a strange situation, but I think it was probably more common than we think, especially when you consider that his wife was also obviously very, very aware of shipbuilding techniques. Her husband having owned his own shipyard, and also it's in a lot of these cases, a lot of the a lot of wives were very actively involved in managing the yards when their husbands were away, or even entirely managing the accounting and financing for all of those. So in terms of what they were paying for and what goods and services were rendered, I think I think that she probably would have been very, very well versed in how that worked.
Yeah.
So in the following weeks, another surveyor was appointed to Bangor, and unfortunately, I don't think that there was much of a pension. I don't think he'd worked there for a particularly long time for a huge pension. But there is a slightly happy ending. We do know that she managed to she was bequeathed £200, which was quite a large amount of money back then. So she would have been well, and that was in addition to a house that they already lived in. So there was no. So we know that she died there with the house in possession. So it's really interesting. I was going to say, because we don't know how long, how ill her husband had been, and it's very unclear exactly for how long she would have been doing this surveying, or even how many ships she inspected. In fact, you can probably imagine that at least a handful of the ships either side of his death were probably conducted by her on notes that she'd put together.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, as I say, Anne Johns should go down in Lloyd's Register's history as a very good surveyor. But yeah, as it's especially amazing as we never would have discovered anything like this within our project if we weren't
No.
digitising and cataloguing the ship plan and survey report collection.
No, well,
Yeah,
as you said, we know when the first female surveyor was officially appointed,
yeah, yeah.
and considering it was over 100 years after Anne Johns, I mean that's quite a gap
He's
between
quite
the two.
something.
But yeah, I mean, as we said, we had no idea that it was in our archive, and I remember when, when you found it and sort of coming to me and saying, "Did you know about our first unofficial female surveyor?"
Yeah,
No. And then told me the story, and I just think it's absolutely incredible that and I do think it is quite commonplace with husbands and wives, and if the husband is in a very kind of sort of a certain type of profession or technical or whatever, that the wife often knows about the profession or knows about the area, particularly if she grew up there, or if particularly as surveyors would have, well, I mean, apart from Johns's dispute with Jones, but I mean, surveyors often had quite a standing in the community, didn't they? So you can imagine the wife having quite a standing in the community, socially and not. And I'd like to, imagine that maybe she took an interest in his work, and he'd go home and say, this is the plan I'm working on, this is the survey, this is what's going on, and she picked things up or was curious herself, maybe interested in the work that led her to be able to sort of basically convince everyone that she was her husband surveying ships.
yeah.
And got that comment from the shipbuilders.
It's amazing, really. It is quite something. I mean, I think especially when you think that Bangor was, would have been quite a rural place at that time. I think that prior to the writing of that letter, I think they'd only had a railway. They'd had a railway station in 1848. So it would have been, pretty much a place largely only accessible by the sea or the road. But also, yeah, I think we tend to think that with a lot of rural places that they can be a little bit more closed off, I suppose, and that they're maybe less accepting of certain things like a woman surveying a ship. But obviously, it shows that it was probably actually, it wouldn't have been something that would have been that that unpalatable, really. Obviously she would have had, as you say, a lot of standing in the community. It's probably very likely that she had a really good knowledge of what was going on and what what was required as well. I mean, I know on a on a separate note that we have a lot of the early letter books, which hopefully we'll get a chance to go through and catalogue and digitize at some stage, for John Barr Cummings, with the first surveyor in Glasgow, in the sort of Clyde area. But his letter books are really amazing because they do reveal lots of cases where people come and go to the office to make payments for surveys that were done, and and a lot of them are women that are coming in, and they balance the books on their shipyards and they negotiate quite vigorously, and will relay any complaints or issues that they've had with the surveys in quite a technical manner. So it's something that I think. It's not something that I think has been really, I suppose, probably written about all that much, really. But it's it's they're definitely, I think women are definitely present there, definitely.
Yeah, and I mean that it's great to hear.
Absolutely, yeah.
As often we find in our archive, women are few and far between, particularly in the early years, and only really when you get into looking at the the records from the sort of HQ offices in London or the outports or whatever it was, that it was the woman was the cleaner or the housekeeper or and then obviously the First and Second World War, they bring women into certain departments, but it still felt like surveying was a man's world, a man's job. He had to have qualifications and have expertise, going to sea and all of that sort of thing. So it's interesting to see that actually it was happening, even if it was a bit hush hush and behind the scenes, but that they were willing to acknowledge old Mrs. Johns. I'd love to know more about her. She's one of those that
I know.
love to
Yeah.
know more about her. Did she, what did she do after her husband died? Did she really just like ships?
Yeah, it does
Don't
make you
know.
wonder. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, all I can, I sort of imagine that, with the Bangor surveyor being laid up, ill for quite some time. I suppose,
Mm.
yeah, there would have, money would, they would have needed the money. So I
Mm.
assume she just would have rolled up her sleeves and just started. I wonder how it started. I also really wonder. It would be amazing
Mm.
to work to find out how it started. Who,
Yeah.
whether she brought it up, whether he brought it up. I
Yeah.
don't
Did
know.
did
It'd be
did
amazing.
did she say, was there that classic of,
Yeah,
"Oh, well, you're not working, we need money," and he's going,
yeah,
"Oh, it'll be all right, it's fine. I'm not going to be in bed for very long. I'm
yeah,
not that unwell." And did she say, "I'll go, no, I'm sick. I know what I'm doing. I've got you." Obviously the surveyors had their rules and their, the ways in which ships should be surveyed and classed. So
yeah,
she must have had all of his documentation and records. So was it her saying, "I'm going to go and do it"? Was it him saying, "Actually, can you go and do this?" Did he have that respect for her?
yeah.
And she said, "Yeah, of course, off I go." And what were I mean, we obviously know in the letter that was sent that she was a very good
A very
surveyor,
good surveyor.
a
Yeah.
very good surveyor. But was there any sort of feeling around the shipyards? Did she appear in the shipyards and say, "Oh, well, I'm here on behalf of my husband"? And did everyone go, "Okay," or, "Oh
Yeah.
God, what's she doing here? Like, this is
It's
a woman's place."
yeah. It's
It,
it's interesting. It is really interesting. But I mean, what's really fascinating though is that, again, if you look at the run of survey reports that were done within the Bangor office,
mm,
uh, sort of, as I say, before and after the Bangor surveyor's death,
mm,
um, there actually are quite a lot of, they were quite like, they were actively surveying at least every other day.
mm,
So I don't know if there was an objection. It's, to a woman surveying the ships. It
mm.
definitely doesn't come across in
I
the
mean,
records.
also as well, sort of a couple of questions I've got for you, Max, here. One, would Johns have had any staff sort of around in the office, or was it just him on his own?
I think it was just him on his own,
Okay.
somehow. I think that, it took them quite a long time, as I say, to even establish the Bangor surveyorship
Mm,
as an exclusive post,
mm,
for LR. I think that, for the most part, it was still considered very, very rural. It was mainly sort of fishing and coasting,
mm,
sort of pit stop on the way to the sort of places like Manchester and Liverpool,
mm,
further south to Cardiff, or even across the Irish Sea to Dublin or Belfast.
mm.
So I think in that regard, it's not. I think that, the surveyors were expected to do, particularly in those smaller ports,
Mm.
to do everything themselves. Yeah, everything from the accounts, the finances, the surveying,
Yeah.
sending everything off, making sure that all the books were in order. But yeah, so there would have been nothing like you would have had in places like Liverpool or Newcastle or London or Bristol.
Yeah, because that's what I
Yeah,
was, sort of thinking about these smaller outports that was obviously busy enough to warrant them being an exclusive surveyor to that port, not a non-exclusive
yeah,
surveyor that would have
yeah,
travelled across several ports, for example. But obviously busy enough that he's exclusive to that area, but not busy enough that he gets clerical staff
yeah,
or
yeah,
an apprentice or something, that you might think would happen. So yeah, part of me sort of thinks, okay, to keep the business running or to keep LR running in the area, someone has to step in if that person's
yeah.
taken sick. Obviously, the wife did in this case. But then my other question is, when you've looked at the documents around this time, does the handwriting match before and after his death, or does it match any of the other survey reports that you've seen that are his?
So it's interesting. Yeah, we see he starts to write less, sort of fewer letters,
Mm.
in the run up to his death, but we do know that what it's really hard to say, but I think that I've not noticed a significant change with the handwriting, which would
Oh,
suggest that maybe maybe she was, we know that surveyors generally took notebooks out with them and made all the notes they needed to, and then would often fill in the survey reports at home. So it could be that she was doing a similar thing with a notebook, taking those down, and either doing them herself or giving them to her husband to do while he was in bed, just so that the handwriting matched, and then getting him to sign. It's really hard to say,
because I mean, could there be the other thing that, obviously he goes out, he writes his notes, he does his assessment, he comes back, has to fill it out. Could there also be that possibility that his wife had always filled them out as almost like a clerical admin person? And that, because I think there are, I mean, I can't remember off the top of my head, but there are stories of, the wife writing the correspondence on behalf of the husband, or particularly if they are that important or that busy.
Yeah, no,
with air quotes, but that he might have come back and said, okay, can you write up this stuff? I need to go and do something else, or or whatever. There are sort of possibilities there that I don't know if we'll ever know the answer either way. But it's just fascinating. It's almost it's for me, it creates like a little picture, not only of how the shipyard was working and how LR was working, but also how a personal home life was potentially working.
Definitely.
What it was to be the wife of a surveyor and to live with all of that that a surveyor did.
Definitely. I mean, she doing what she was doing at that time, and I think must have been quite a formidable person. To take that on. But as you say, this is one little revealing comment within a letter. It could have been something that she was actually doing from time to time for ages.
Just sat at home stamping her feet, going, why does no one recognise what I do?
Certainly at London, they probably wouldn't have been particularly happy about anybody else doing the surveys on anyone on the surveyor's behalf. But
of course.
It's one of those things, I suppose. Really, again, she would have been very well known in the area, as a husband was as well.
And when you work in the outports so far from HQ in London, I'm not just talking about Wales, Scotland, or Ireland, or whatever, but also globally, and it is a smaller port, or it's you are a bit kind of remote. I mean, this was about the time that LR was really about to sort of boom overseas, wasn't it? More officers were about to be opened up. China was sort of only nine years away, really, and so LR was obviously starting to get used to that idea that there's an HQ, but then there's these little ports that will be around the world. And I think when you are out away from HQ, obviously you've got to do your job and you've got to do your surveys and do them properly and send them back. But how you operate your little office or your little port, I mean, mate, that was probably down largely to the surveyor, and what HQ don't know don't hurt them.
Pretty much. I mean, I within our collection, I love those little tiny port offices. I think they are the best. They are really interesting. And they reveal so much about the surveyor and their working relationship with all the ship owners and the shipbuilders locally, and just what their place was in that community. I seem to remember in with the surveyor in Newry, he talks about the fact that he makes a big deal about the fact that he's had to walk 2 miles from his house.
Oh God.
And that this is really unacceptable, for him, and and everything. And it's really they Bangor's such a beautiful place. It's just quite amazing to kind of get a little insight into what life at that time was like. Particularly on the sort of with the sort of as a little sort of small bustling maritime port. But
well, thank you for sharing that story, Max, with me and with our listeners.
Thanks very much.
It was really, really good. Are the documents on the website if people are interested?
They are not yet, but they will be. They are. They will be. They are currently being processed and cropped and trimmed and everything else that's needed. But they will be going up online very soon.
Cool. Well, we will make sure that we let you all know when they do officially go on the website.
Definitely. get some links up there.
So Max, if people wanted to look at our documents anyway, where would they go?
Oh, you're getting very forgetful with this.
I am, yeah.
Every episode you ask.
Every episode, I know. One day I'll pay attention.
Fine, I'll do it again just for you. But yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, that's hec.lrfoundation.org.uk. If you go to the archive and library section, which should be at the top in the banner, and then within the online catalogue sub tab, you also have this ship plans and survey reports tab, and you can either search by ships or by documents. I should also say we have 2 new features to the ship plan and survey report collection which have just gone live. The first is that obviously all of our catalogue fields, they now have a hover feature, so if there's ever a field that you don't quite like the look of, or you don't quite understand, then you can hover over them and it will give you an explanation. But the other far more exciting thing is we have now a data exporter. So please check this out. It allows you to, once you've created the search that you want, you can then export that raw data into either a TSV or a CSV. So yeah, and it's I think it was 100,000 documents you can do. Was it 300,000? I should check my notes, but yeah, it's huge.
I have to say, I have been using it for my own research for
yes,
work, and
yeah,
it's great. You know,
yeah. It's very cool.
It was absolutely brilliant. Well, thank you, Max.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening and for joining us. And we will have another episode out soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.